neurologists, we are fortunate to welcome Dr. Ali Marvasti to speak to us on Know Thyself, Know God, Meditation and SALAAT from a neurologist perspective. Dr. Ali Marvasti is a neurology registrar in London with a little over a year left to complete his training to consultant level. He is a member of SICM's executive committee. He obtained his medical degree at Cambridge and spent a bachelor's year at MIT and Harvard studying neuroscience, functional MRI, which is brain imaging, and physics. He was active in student unions including MSAs, ISOC, and Cambridge University Students' Union, elected executive committee member. The last 14 years, he has been studying and practicing medicine and neurology. He currently works at Chelsea and Westminster Hospital and the National Hospital for Neurology and Neurosurgery in Queen Square. Please welcome wa salawat ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad.
Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. I've had a few thoughts and I've noticed a few things that I wanted to share with you. And our speaker, unfortunately, was ill, so I'm doing this at short notice. I hope you'll find it useful, if not informative. So just a few disclaimers. I'm not a scholar of religion, and I'm not a scholar of neuroscience. But I think it's important to make a few notes just about my background, because they'll help explain why I'm giving this talk. So from a very young age, as a teenager, I was very interested in why we do everything we do. So I read the Quran with full translation, and I read a few tafasirs, not in full obviously, but in the verses that I was interested in, including Allama Tabatabai, and over the last decade or so, Sheikh Bamapur's tafsirs have been very influential, as well as other ones. So I come from a perspective, a world view where our understanding of religion has to be graded. So everyone talks about, do you believe in this? Do you have faith? As if it's digital. We believe and we don't. I think there are certain tenets that allude that actually it's a spectrum. It's more analog. So there are certain tenets of faith which you cannot follow in. You need to reach the conclusion yourself. Tawheed being the example. So for me, Tawheed is the first base, and it's 100 near, asymptotically approaching certainty of 100%. Everything else is built on top of this, and there are certain things that I'm less certain in, and my faith is weak, and certain things that my faith is stronger. And I think our actions are evidence of what is going on in our minds and how strong our faiths are. So that's my really background, and over the last 13, 14 years, obviously, I've been studying medicine and practicing neurology. So I think it's important to me personally, at least, to make these two important fields meet. So the objective is really to allude to a few facts, including looking at SALAAT from the lens of a neurologist or from neuroscience, and adding a holistic depth to Know Thyself, Know God. Where do these come from? So there's lots of Sufi mages and saints that have lots of sayings, and whatever you read, whether it's Buddhism or Taoism or Hinduism or Christianity or Islam, there are certain things about the spirituality that attracts everyone to them, and everyone can associate with them. And even people that lack faith, they will have some sort of refuge in modern day practices that are becoming more vogue, including mindfulness, meditation, yoga, so different aspects. And what I'm setting out to state is that SALAAT is the most perfect form of the above. So, what do these pictures all have in common? It's what we do. It makes us, it's what makes us run. Why we wake up in the morning, why we have breakfast, why we go to work, why we come home. Whether we like the smell of coffee, or if you look at the tube, everyone's listening to music and keeping themselves occupied, reading the news. A specific scent, a smell, can take you back 20 years, and you can remember the specific place, who you were with, and it can be very, very sentimental. You'll remember specific details from that specific scent. We often say the smile of your child, or a child to their parents, or to a stranger is charity, and a smile can have a huge effect on us. And we often, enjoy telling jokes, hearing jokes, seeing our children laugh. For certain other people, materialism is a very driving force. It's a motivating force. Friendship, taste. So everything that we do, as far as I'm concerned, all of these, let's put the philosophical debate away, that they exist even if we didn't, but none of them happen outside of the brain. So everything happens within the brain. All of these experiences of seeing your child smile, of being happy at your degree, of tasting, of smelling, of being cold right now. So this whole picture takes the whole space, because this engages the same brain networks that we try to engage in a healthy way day to day, and it can take over everything. And so the thing that they have in common is dopamine and the nucleus accumbens, specific regions of the brain. So in rat models, and I'm sure the same would apply in humans, but for obvious reasons it has not been done, that when you stimulate this area, then the rats will stop eating, they'll stop running, they'll stop doing everything, because as far as they're concerned, they're satisfied. They don't need anything else, and they will end up dying. So not too dissimilar from heroin addiction. So I just want to interlude with a verse here. Already there has been for you a sign in the two armies which met, one fighting in the cause of Allah and another of disbelievers. They saw them to be twice their own number by their eyesight, but Allah supports with His victory whom He wills. Indeed, in that is a lesson for those of vision. So here the believers are almost superhuman because they're outnumbered, but yet they win. So they have they've engaged specific brain networks that has made them superhuman. This is the argument that I'm making. Beautified for people is the love of that which they desire, of women and sons, heaped up sums of gold and silver, fine branded horses, and cattle, and tilled land. That is the enjoyment of worldly life, but Allah has with Him the best return. So everything that we do again, all of that replace with one whole picture, and that would be whatever you want to call it, God, SALAAT, spiritualism, and that's what everyone seeks. And what I take from these ayahs is that, and from different ayahs where God says, who is there that will lend God a goodly loan, and God will pay it back to you twice or fourfold, and it's like a seed and it will grow. So God isn't saying if you give charity, it's good and it's altruistic. It's saying that actually the return that you will get from giving this charity is greater than if you kept it for yourself. And that's difficult for modern materialism and capitalism and everything else to fathom, because if you win lots of money in the lottery, I know I will be very happy if I buy myself a Lamborghini. But what I've been taught, and I find difficult to believe, is that if I give all the money away to those that are more needy and I see them smile, that smile will be far more valuable and will last far longer and will make me happier, despite the apparent contradiction. So my argument is that there is never any true, pure form of altruism. It appears so to deceive us, and that's what you can argue that shaitan deceives us. So if we go to the next slide. So I just wanted to give a few background before engaging in what happens during SALAAT. So reductionism, science is all about reductionism. So simplification, this is one cell and it makes a synapse with another neuron. And so there's electrical signal that passes and then chemical signals that are released. So there's lots of different forms. There's a local form. So you have neurotransmitters released locally that affect only specific other neurons. Or there's global forms. So one projection can release lots and lots of neurotransmitters everywhere around the whole brain. And then there are neurons that release chemicals and it travels in the blood. So it has systemic effects as hormones. And then there are multiple different types of neurotransmitters and multiple different types of receptors, and they all do different things. So very complicated. And to add to that complex, there are 100 trillion synapses, so connections between each neuron. So each of us have more connections within our brain than the number of stars in the Milky Way, which is a humongous number, or the number of observable galaxies in the whole universe. So moving back up again, so from the global picture, so this person is facing this way towards the right, and starting from the occipital lobe, this is the visual cortex. So right now that you're all looking at this screen, the back of your brain is very, very active, and it's using a lot of your oxygen, and the blood flow to it is increasing. If you close your eyes, it will reduce. So the right side of the brain obviously controls the left side of the body, and the left side of the brain generally controls the right side. The parietal lobe is involved in attention and orientation. So if you have a specific loss of a parietal lobe, say on the right side, then you won't be able to attend to things on the left. So you can see them, but you won't attend to them. For example, patients that have a stroke in the right parietal lobe will have a plate in front of them. They can describe what they see on the left, but if they start eating from their plate, they'll eat only from the right side, and they'll think that they're done. But if you ask them specifically, they'll say, I can see. So it's inattention. So the temporal lobe becomes, again, more complicated. There are different things. So there are different chips in the temporal lobe. There is a chip called the fusiform face area. If you think about our computers or our phones, they all have multiple. They have a graphics card. They have a Wi-Fi card. They have lots of different elements. So the fusiform face area engages every time you see a face. So and it's very, very efficient. It can tell you the color, the gender, and the identity in that order, usually in speed. And you can train it. So some people say, I'm not very good with faces. There is a rare disease called prosopagnosia where they only lack the fusiform face area. So they lack this chip, and they can't tell people's identity from their faces, but if you speak to them, they can tell. Okay. Then there's the hippocampus, which is a tiny place in the middle of the temporal lobe. Again, that's involved in memory formation. And it's one of the first areas that goes in Alzheimer's because of the accumulated protein causing damage. And so one of the first signs is that they'll call you up and say, I'm lost, where am I? Because it affects the specific cells that are for location, so grid cells and place cells in the hippocampus. Then there's the frontal lobe, which is very large. It's involved in movement and sensation, but also in personality, behavior, and self-control. And then there's the cerebellum, which is the error correction, basically. So for movements, if you want to do fine movements and pick something up, it'll tell you how far you are and change your velocity. So the picture I'm building is one of a very specialization of different brain areas doing specific things. It's important to note that the brain is adaptive. So if someone has a stroke and they're very, very young, or a neonate or slightly older, then the brain can adapt. So an area that would usually perform attention or memory can be taken over by another area. And this only happens during development, not later on in life. So there's a specific hearing area. If you lose the hearing area, the understanding area, then you won't be able to understand people, but you can speak. If you lose the speaking area, you won't be able to speak, but you can understand. And you know what you want to say, but you cannot express it. So these are all very specific brain modules. Okay. So just focusing in on this area of, so this is again the person's facing to the left now, and this is looking from the side, and we've cut it open. So this is within, now we're getting towards the center of the brain. We're not going to discuss everything, just very briefly. So this is the hypothalamus, which is one structure, itself many different structures, very complicated, a lot of activity, including hormones, love, hunger, sleep-wake cycle, tiny area. And it controls all of that. And the hormones released by the pituitary. So just going through a few of these that are relevant for some of the things that we've been taught about SALAAT. So sleep-wake cycle, despite it being obvious, it's not obvious how it affects the brain. So when the sun rises and the sun sets, these are actually intrinsic temporal codes for the brain. So every time we see light, then the brain regulates itself to the duration of the light and then to the duration of the darkness. And that's something that we lose in our modern lives, where we're always surrounded by light and light pollution. So there are serious diseases of sleep-wake cycles where people cannot sleep, or people have reversed sleep-wake cycle, or they can't sleep when they want to do. And then you have to treat that. And trick the brain and give them what it needs. So, for example, melatonin is something that most of us will have secreted at about 6 p.m. or 8 p.m. this evening, and it's just a little signal. It doesn't have a big effect, but it's a little signal, and it engages brain networks to prepare you for sleep towards the end of the day. You can suppress it, negate it by being in a heightened state of awareness, doing something that you like, or a lot of light. So this is from Surah Al-Imran. The patient, the true, the obedient, those who spend in the way of God, and those who seek forgiveness before dawn. There is something in the sleep-wake cycle at a specific moment where all your networks and all your brain activity is changing throughout the day. And what this ayah is saying is that this is the most conducive time to prayer. This is the most conducive time for your brain to switch into this gear 7. Okay. So there are lots more areas to the brain. There's lots of wires, which is the white matter. The neocortex is most of what we've discussed around the surface of the brain. And then the limbic system is somewhere in between the allocortex, and it's more involved in motivation, emotion, and complex higher functions as well as base functions. So just to labor the point about structure, function, motif. So that means that when you look at a specific area of the brain, you can predict what it does or what the person does. So most of us, when we look at this, we'll see one cube in a certain orientation. Some of us, after a while of staring at it, instead of seeing it lying on a table, we will see it as if we're looking up at it from underneath it. And then you can start switching between the two. Or if you look at this one, you might see a vase first, and then you might see two faces, and then you can switch between the two. So just looking at the occipital lobe, if you give the surface area and the thickness, people have done specific complex statistical analysis, and you can predict how fast you will switch between these two different perceptions. So there's a direct correlation. So going through the limbic system, very simplified, there's lots of different areas, and this creates one. So it's a combination of lots of different brain areas that are usually active together and perform a single task or a single emotion. We're going to concentrate on a few of these. So the amygdala, the posterior cingulate cortex, and the olfactory cortex, orbital frontal cortex. So the prefrontal cortex is the area at the front of the brain that we discussed with determining personality and behavior. And sorry about this. I can't read the screen from here. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. رأيت الذي ينهى عبدا إذا صلى. Have you seen the one who forbids God's slave from praying? أرأيت أن كان على الهدى. Have you considered if he is on a guided path? أو أمر بالتقوى, or if he is enjoining righteousness? أرأيت إن كذب وتولى. ألم يعلم بأن الله يرى. كلا لئن لم ينتهي لنسفع بالناصية. Verily, if he does not desist, then we will grab him by the forelock. ناصية كاذبة خاطئة, a lying, sinful forelock. So the forelock is usually at the front of the head, and the orbital frontal cortex is at the front of the brain. And there is a very famous case of Phineas Gage, who was an American railroad worker in the 19th century, and there was an explosion, and an iron rod went through his orbital frontal cortex, his frontal lobe. So he had significant changes in his personality, and so certain exaggerations in the accounts, but from all accounts, he became a compulsive liar, cheater, stealer, which was completely contradictory to his usual character, as reported by his friends and family. And so this was the first time that people realized that this was a very important part for behavior and lying. So it's involved in inhibition of primary responses. It's less active in children, and it becomes more active as we grow up. it correlates with toilet training and other things. So involved in differentiating conflicting thoughts and weighing things out. So there is the continuation of this surah goes on to say, I don't want to say the Arabic because there's a sajda, do not obey him, prostrate and draw near. So there is again, it's saying do not obey him, prostrate and draw near. So there is something within the action of prostration that suggests submission to a higher state. But this submission is while your frontal lobe is engaged. So it's not one of disinhibition, it's not one of lack of self-control. It's one of conscious submission and conscious prayer. So there is an important role of the orbital frontal cortex or prefrontal cortex, a broader area, in TAQWA, which is what we call TAQWA, which is what textbooks call self-control and inhibition. So TAQWA, depending on who you speak to, my understanding, I was always taught TAQWA has three aspects. So one is fear of God, and that can be activated via the amygdala. And the second one is self-control or avoidance of sin, and that is when your orbital frontal cortex is engaged. And the third one is remembrance of God. So there's 3 levels or 3 aspects to TAQWA, and so these are the different brain areas involved in that. So looking at the amygdala, which is involved in fear and emotion, it's in the mesial temporal lobe. So people with temporal lobe epilepsy will have very unusual symptoms and signs. Most anxiety is anxiety due to some thought or lack of some sort of problem within someone's life. But very rarely, I see them more common as a neurologist, we see people who come with sudden attacks of anxiety out of nowhere, intense fear, impending doom. They'll start shaking and they'll be extremely anxious. Within 3 minutes or so, it'll have passed away. And there are correlates that you can see on scans and on EEG recordings. So they're having seizures within this area. So this area is somehow causing all this emotion. It's also very closely related to the uncus, which is the olfactory cortex, or responsible for smell. So smell has an important role in taste and memory recall as well. So an important part of the limbic system is the amygdala. So this, just very briefly, it highlights the role of smell. So it says, flavor perception is one of the most complex of human behavior. It involves almost all of the senses, particularly the sense of smell, which is involved through odor images generated in the olfactory pathway. In the human brain, these perceptual systems are closely linked to systems for learning, memory, emotion, and language. So you can tap into a wide network. So there is a hadith from the Prophet which mentions something which people have found troublesome at different times. And that is that from this world, and the Arabic's up there, but I really can't read it, two things really interest me, and that's perfume and women, and the coolness of my eyes during salat. So if I'm correct, and I think that's what the Arabic says, he says 2 things of this world. So salat is not of this world. And why has he chosen those 2? I don't think this is a hadith to tell us how good perfume or women are, even though that may be the case. I think it's getting at what the state that we discussed that salat can bring. It's the state that salat is often looked at is that charity. Why should I give my money away when I can get myself an extra house or an extra car or more amenities? So salat is often used as that. Why should I give my time? Why should I do all of these routines? Wash my hands, do this specifically, do the intention, not have bad smells, do these specific recitations, and then do these specific actions. So I think this is highlighting that these two are much more easier for people to understand. And I think what this is highlighting is the role of SALAAT, how big it can be, the happiness that it creates. So perfume is also interesting because both of these are very, very, very active in dopamine release and the sense of pleasure. So perfume, as we said, can bring specific memories, and it's also very, very involved within the uncus and amygdala. So there's almost a sensation that this is a key, it's a button, and you have to press it. If it's disengaged or fearful, bad smell, then you cannot engage the rest of the networks that you need for SALAAT. So SALAAT here being a specific event in the brain, a specific activity in the brain. We'll come back to this again. But again, remember, so nothing happens outside of the brain. Anything you experience, anything you think, anything you perceive has a specific neural correlate. So something is happening in your brain, and we can investigate a lot of it, and some of it we can't, at least yet. So there are problems with this, what I've presented so far, and one of them is the binding problem. When you see your father or your son, your occipital cortex is activated, your fusiform face area is activated, you've recognized who they are, and you know what their voice is like, you know where they lived, you know where they were when they were born, you know what they're probably going to ask you now. And how do you know all of this? Because they're all different areas of the brain. So there is one, and this is the issue of consciousness, which is a very controversial topic within neuroscience, and anyone that talks about it within the scientific field is pretty much cast aside because it's too metaphysical. So I think the neural substrate of consciousness eludes us, and I think there is a reason. We will probably get closer and closer with time, but there are certain things that I think elude that we will never fully get there, because know thyself and know God means if we really truly understand the neural basis of consciousness, we would have truly been to God. And there's evidence that there are certain barriers within this world of the dunya, which is the lowest world of the heavens. And these barriers will only be lifted on the Day of Judgment. And hence, then, when you believe then, when you're certain then, you no longer believe because you will see it with certainty. Then it doesn't count then. It only counts now when you need the eye of faith. So so far we've described the brain as if each button does a specific thing. So you activate one button, it does one thing, you activate another button, you see something, you activate another one, you feel anger. But then it becomes more complicated. So each of these areas, if you press them together, it does something else. So it's as if you're playing a piano. We've described each note, what each note does. But if you now play them together, you're playing a chord. So we call this brain networks. So one specific brain network that we're going to discuss is the posterior cingulate cortex, and I think that's the important one if you don't take anything from this so far, if you haven't so far. So if you think about the brain as surface water or a swimming pool or an ocean, and every thought or everything you see or everything you touch is a pebble onto the surface of the water, and it creates a ripple. It'll go off, it'll reflect, it'll come back. And if you really wanted to, you can probably look at the reflections and how it goes and how it comes back and work backwards and say where the pebble was dropped and how big it was and how fast it went. And then if you keep doing this, then you get lots and lots of waves. And you can see these using different techniques, EEG, MEG, fMRI, functional MRI. So this is a functional MRI image, and you're seeing what's called the default mode network. So when you have nothing to do and you're at home at a moment of boredom, that's what's active, your default mode network. A bit of your frontal cortex that we've discussed, and here the posterior cingulate and the precuneus and other areas as well. But this is the important one. So the default mode network is basically when you're daydreaming and when you don't have a specific task to attend to, so things can just flow. It's a free flow. So the posterior cingulate cortex acts as a switch in changing your gears. If we think about the brain as a car rather than as buttons, then it switches you from an internal state of awareness to an external state of awareness. So some of you may be in an internal state of awareness and falling asleep now, but other people will be trying to understand what I'm saying, and switching between the two occurs here. So there are 4 states. You can pay attention to the external world and have a broad attention. So if I stop speaking and it's the end of the talk and no one has anything to say, that's the state that we'll be in. Or if you're sitting in a cafe looking out the window, that's the state that you're in, so external and broad. If you're reading a specific subject or listening to me, it's external and it's a specific. And if your internal state, again, you can be in your bed at night reflecting on your day. So there'll be a specific. What did I do in the morning? What did I do wrong? What did I do right? What do I have to do tomorrow? That's internal and it's specific. And then there's internal and there's general, where you're not paying attention to anything outside. You have no stimuli, no sounds, no sights, no lights, no touch. And you just let whatever flows come. And then you can decide what to do with that general form. And this state is what usually is referred to as meditative state. So if we think of these as a string that's resonating, as the pebble falls in, you get a big splash and it comes and goes. But then you get this equilibrium where it kind of looks like the same. So the same areas are high and the same areas are low. And if you're doing the same thing, you get different nodes. So these areas where there's the most activity. So this is that node. So when this goes wrong, clinically you can get certain problems. Some of these are clear, but there are different ways you can get these. So schizophrenia is one, where they lose insight into what is internally generated and what's external. So schizophrenics might have a psychotic thought and they wouldn't be able to tell the difference. Or autism spectrum, attention deficit disorder. But it's not this is not the only brain area. There's other areas. So how do we know all of this? Well, different areas of the brain are lesioned. So you have a stroke, or you have a tumor, or you have an injury or a head injury, or you put an electrode and you stimulate it and it does something, or you image, as we've discussed, or we look at EEG. So these are surface EEGs, where they basically, it's an electroencephalogram, similar to an ECG, where you measure the electrical activity of the heart. You measure the electrical activity of the brain. Now, looking at this, you can tell what people are approximately doing. So even if you don't see the person, you can look at this and say, the person was sleeping at this time. You can even say the person was dreaming at this time. You can say the person was having an epileptic fit. You can say probably which side was seizing, or if both sides were seizing. So there are certain things you can tell. There's different stages of sleep. You can tell that from this as well. And then there are meditative states, and you can tell that from this as well. And these are affected by drugs, by medications, prescribed drugs, and illicit drugs. So all of these, everything that we do modulates this electrical activity. So just a very brief summary. Everything that we perceive and think only occurs in the brain. Everything that happens in the brain, so whether it's a taste, an emotion, a smell, a music, or a sentimental memory. And each one has its own neural substrate. So it can have a specific processing unit, like the face area, or it can have a diffuse network of brain activity, different buttons being pressed, lots of different waves. So slowly we're moving away from rigid, solid science into more the borderlines of science. So meditation and mindfulness are very ill-defined, vague terms, and sometimes used interchangeably. Sometimes mindfulness used as a modern age thing, where you need to have no religious conviction to be able to perform it. And meditation often brings, thoughts of Buddhist monks in a corner somewhere where they've shut themselves off from the external world in order to practice this internal state. So just before I carry on, I just wanted to clarify, I think I missed saying plasticity. So the brain actually physically changes every time you see something, every time you do something, every time you say something, it physically changes. If you keep doing something, it will physically change. So we have that every act of sight and hearing and of touching will be inquired into, as I'm paraphrasing one of the verses of the Quran. But and there is another ayah that says habitual sinners. It specifically is very strongly against people who are habitual sinners. So anything that's repeated, the synapses that we looked at become larger, the neurotransmitters increase, the receptors increase, so the next time you do it, the effect is larger and it's easier to do. I mean, it's very clear to us, but even recently, like within the last month or so, there was a paper in Nature that says that the brain adapts to lying or cheating, some sort of title like that, and it becomes easier and easier. We've all done something that we shouldn't have, and if you think back to when you did that one thing that you shouldn't have, you probably felt your heart coming out of your mouth, and you felt your hands trembling, and you felt your hands sweating. If you keep doing that, it'll stop happening. So that's your and you can physically change your brain. So these people practice meditation to an extent that it becomes easier and easier for them to do it, just like driving. So if you think of our brains as a vehicle, then you take it for a drive. The more often you take it for a drive, 3 times a day, 5 times a day, 24 hours a day, then the easier it is to switch into that mode and go on the highway, gear 5. The less you go on the highway, you're probably on the left lane, going very slowly. And this is where we'll come to SALAAT, but basically, yes, we've actually discussed this. So essentially, the purpose of this talk isn't to scientifically validate religion or even prayer or SALAAT. If anything, it's the other way around, because that's where my baseline is. And science is far behind, but it's interesting because it might give us tools to understand why we do what we do. And so we're advised, for example, to do wudu and how to do it. So if you think about the actions, first you clean your hands. Now that your hands are clean, you clean your face, and then you clean your arms, and then you clean your head, and then you clean your feet. So you're going from you need to clean your hands to be able to clean the rest of the body. There's no point of cleaning the rest and then cleaning your hands, because your hands have just spread the dirt. And you're going from clean to dirty, almost how surgeons scrub in theatre. There is a paper in psychological journals which reports controlled situations where it's a computer simulation, and people they make some sort of money or some sort of account. I haven't had the time to check it exactly, but essentially they do something, they can be guilty and cheat someone of their money, virtual money, and then afterwards they rate how happy they are, how unhappy they are, how guilty they are. Lots of different ratings, but the one they want to look at is guilt. And there are different groups. So the group that has a shower or washes their hands, I can't remember exactly which, has a statistically significant lower rating of guilt sensation afterwards, even though they've done the same amount. So if you correct for the amount that they've cheated the other people. So there is something in the application of water and cleansing. And we see that in different religions. So we have, well, in Islam, we do it 5 times for prayer, we do it every time. Christians have the baptism, and they do that once a lifetime at least. So there is a significance physically as well as spiritually. So meditation's been practiced since antiquity. It's used in lots of different religions. There's no external task. You need a large space. You need time. So prayer usually grows from moments of space and moments of time. And it's interesting to think about it that way, because that's what we do. We have mosques, which are specific spaces, or churches, which are specific spaces. And there are specific times for prayer, so Sundays, or afternoon, or evening. And this time is set, it's almost in your calendar. It should be free for that whole period, because you need to not have any distractions. If you have any, if you're praying, we've all had that sensation where you have nothing to do and you're bored, and as soon as you say Allahu Akbar and you're praying, then a million things come to your mind that you haven't done this, you haven't done this, you haven't done this, you need to do this tomorrow. So now your brain's switched. It's gone into this internal broad mode. You don't want that mode. So you need to sit down and you need to let that go first. You need to start with this meditation. Let it go first, and then, because Salat is gear 7. It's the as we believe, as we practice it, we believe that Prophet Jesus, they all prayed very similarly, and there are very similar accounts in the Bible. So there's no point in going on the highway, switching on your car, and then going into gear 7. You're never going to get anywhere. It's better than doing nothing, but you need to go gear 1, 2, 3, keep going faster, and then go gear 7. And so you need this. You need to put time away for your prayers. You need a specific space. You need no external task, no specific worries, no distractions. Breathing affects your EEGs as well, and everyone knows that. When we look for seizures and we EEG patients, and if we don't see a seizure but we really believe they have one, we get them to hyperventilate, because it can disinhibit the underlying brain networks. So this is where the posterior cingulate cortex and the default mode network is engaged. You're doing nothing, no external. Mindfulness can be thought of as very similarly. I mean, none of these they're very vague definitions. But usually it's analyzing your thoughts and emotions. So rather than having a broad internal state, it's specific states. You think about specific things, and you begin to dissociate yourself from them. So if you felt anger because someone spilt water on you, that's an instinctive thing. It's an animal reaction. By thinking through it with mindfulness, you can dissociate with that feeling. And you'll almost become a different person. So there are other forms that we see, that there's new crazes, and that have lots of benefits. Things like Yoda as well. Yoga. Yoda would be a good example as well. So yoga is more of a physical aspect to well-being and being healthy, whereas mindfulness and meditation are the internal aspects. So what Salat does is combines these two into a physical form and an internal form. But obviously, as we've just made the argument for, both of these only occur in the brain. So the physical form is just activity within the brain, engaging specific buttons, and the internal status is a specific Salat network. So there is TAQWA, which grows from this. So it works both ways. When you pray properly, you're engaging these networks, which we know are involved in self-control, and that enhances your taqwa. But it also works the other way around, because the more you have self-control and the more you enhance your taqwa, the synapses are stronger, and so it becomes easier for you to pray. So another aspect would be listening to what we're told, which is lower your gaze. Because lower your gaze is a very important and astute observation for self-control. It becomes easier and easier not to lower your gaze the more you don't lower your gaze. And the more you lower it, the easier it becomes. But it's a constant state. So again, it starts with the fear, and then continues with self-control, so lowering your gaze, and then continues with zikr, so remembering God. So there are specific verses about da'imuna salat, and people who are in a constant state of prayer. So they've done this for so long that they can go in and out very, very quickly. They're praying whether they're standing, sitting, lying, in all positions. And we know that when you engage these networks, you stop if it's strong enough, we know that, for example, Imam Ali was stabbed during prayer. And as far as history tells us, he continued to finish the prayer. So this means that so usually when you get stabbed, you feel pain. Usually when you get stabbed, you lose your balance, you get distracted. But all of this again occurs in the brain, and you need specific networks to be engaged for you to feel that and be distracted. So his prayer must have been in such a form that those networks that he didn't want were completely switched off. And he had full control on when to switch them on. It's not that he doesn't feel pain. And we have more modern, people walk on, Buddhist monks. The other thing, again, space that I didn't mention is a lot of the prophets we see, they retreat. They go to a cave where it's generally dark and there's no distractions. So the argument that I'm making is that everything occurs in the brain, and we've looked at the brain as a radio or a computer, and we've taken it apart, and we said this is the speaker, this is where the voice is coming from, this is the battery, this is where the energy is coming from, this is the case, this is protecting it. But actually, no matter how hard we look, we wouldn't ever find where the voice is coming from no matter how many times we take apart a radio. So the only way to understand this is within the framework of spirituality. So if you have a spiritual realm and our physical realm, everything that we can know from this realm is via our brain. So all the laws of physics and chemistry is what our minds have perceived. Again, none of them exist except someone's thought of them already, and it's occurred in their brain. So we can almost think of the brain as a mobile phone. So we have electromagnetic waves, and we can download something. And we know that the prophets downloaded things from the spiritual realm. So we call them nuzul, or literally revelation. It's revealed. It comes from above and it comes down. So whether it was a book or a specific instruction. So the way to think about it is that the brain is a three-dimensional, an antenna, or a three-dimensional machine, or four-dimensional with time. And that there are certain barriers, so maybe higher dimensions that we don't have access to. But if we engage these specific brain networks, then we can get access to. And hence, a lot of things become more believable, including true dreams, ru'yas, which come out to be true, and prophethood and revelation. So there is a prophetic hadith which says, "Man arafa nafsah faqad arafa rabbah." He who knows himself knows his Lord. If we take yourself to be your brain, to be your machine, to be your car, if you know your car, then you can go to that gear 7 and go faster. Now everyone's car has this. In fact, let's call it an airplane mode. Everyone's car has an airplane mode. It'll grow wings and it'll fly. Except what you have to do is you have to put up the gears very slowly, one by one, go to gear 5, and then touch the ceiling, touch the roof, and then twist the gear, and then it'll grow wings. And no one knows that. And what we're taught is how to do that, really, is to slowly wean ourselves into this default mode, into these networks of SALAAT. And it becomes more and more beautiful when you experience it, because, as everyone that does it explains, as soon as you do the wudu, the more you practice at it, the next time you do wudu, you're already in that state. It's like a drug addict who no longer needs to take the injection straight away. As soon as they see the syringe, then it brings back all those memories. And in fact, it's bad for them, because now they were off the drug for a year, now they want it really badly because they've just smelt it and seen it. And it's re-engaged the same networks. And it can be the same with salat. So you can have a smell, you can have a sight of the Kaaba, you can do wudu, and you're in that state, as long as there's no distractions. So I think I'm going to end there, actually. I'm just going to give recite a few ayahs, which I think will be meditative, and then we'll end. Those who believe and those whose hearts find satisfaction in the remembrance of Allah, for without doubt in the remembrance of Allah do hearts find rest. Allah bi dhikrillahi tatma'innul qulub. In Surah Al-Mara'ij there is الَّذِينَ هُمْ عَلَى صَلَاتِهِمْ دَائِمُونَ, those who are constantly in a state of prayer. Or in Surah Al-Baqarah فَاذْكُرُونِي أَذْكُرْكُمْ وَاشْكُرُوا لِي وَلَا تَكْفُرُونَ. So remember me, I will remember you, and be grateful to me and do not deny me. In Surah Al-Mujadala, I'll only read the translation. Have you not considered that Allah knows what is in the heavens and what is on earth? There is in no private conversation 3, but that He is the 4th of them, nor are there 5, but that He is the 6th, and no less than that and no more, except that He is with them wherever they are. Then He will inform them of what they did on the day of resurrection. Indeed, God is of all things knowing. In Surah Hadid, there is هو الذي خلق السماوات والأرض في 6 أيام ثم استوى على العرش يعلم ما يلج في الأرض وما يخرج منها وما ينزل من السماء وما تعرج فيها وهو معكم أينما كنتم والله بما تعملون بصير. It is He who created the heavens and the earth in 6 days and established Himself above the throne. He knows what penetrates into the earth and what emerges from it, and what descends from heaven and what ascends therein. And He is with you wherever you are, and of God, of what you do, is seeing. In Surah Anfal, O you who have believed, respond to God and to the Messenger when He calls you to that which gives you life. And know that Allah intervenes between a man and his heart, and that to Him you will be gathered. 3 more ayahs. وَنَحْنُ أَقْرَبُ إِلَيْهِ مِنْكُمْ وَلَكِنْ لَا تُبْصِرُونَ. This is in the context of someone that is dying and others are witnessing the death. And the ayah says, our angels are nearer to Him than you, but you do not see. And Surah Baqarah, وَإِذَا سَأَلَكَ عِبَادِ أَنِّي فَإِنِّي قَرِيبٌ أُجِيبُ دَعْوَةَ الدَّاعِ إِذَا دَعَانِ فَلْيَسْتَجِيبُوا لِي وَلْيُؤْمِنُوا بِي لَعَلَّهُمْ يَرْشُدُونَ. And when my servants ask you concerning me, indeed I am near, I respond to the invocation of the supplicant when he calls upon me. So let them respond to me and believe in me, that they may be rightly guided. Thank you.
Thank you very much. We have some time for questions, if there are any.
Assalamu alaikum.
Salam.
Thank you for your enlightening presentation. So the airplane mode is like a computer game cheat that you can find it somewhere on the internet and do it, and you get through to the last level or something.
I think it's more of an esoteric mode rather than a cheat mode. I think none of this is cheating. All of this requires patience, and there are many ayahs that say وَاسْتَعِينُوا بِالصَّبْرِ وَالصَّلَاةِ, and I think salat requires patience and it needs time.
But also I was interested in the sleep-wake cycle and how that relates to the verse that you mentioned. And so we wake up after Fajr, and that would be in line with the light. As it gets lighter, we pray dawn prayers and we start to wake up. But the verse says wake up before dawn. So that's going against this sleep-wake cycle, which makes it harder. So what do you think to that?
Yes, definitely. And I think, again, harder in the sense that to give charity than to keep the Lamborghini is harder. And I think there's something in that. But I can't give you a satisfying answer.
It's like controlling the nafs, controlling the desire. To go against that.
I think one aspect is definitely that, but I think another aspect is the state that you're in, the fresh state of mind that you're in during that time is much more amenable to reaching a higher state, a higher gear.
Thank you.
It's more conducive.
I have a question. So you mentioned, in passing, you mentioned that obviously sometimes you can use drugs and things like that which alter the state of the brain. That's used by people for meditation and things like that as well. How is that balanced with using a drug like heroin, which you mentioned as well, where you are using it again to get to a state, and is that something which we should be thinking about as a way to get closer to God, or is it something which would draw us away from God?
I would love to be able to give a satisfying answer to your question. I'd have to look it up to tell you really, because I'm not sure what kind of drugs you're alluding to in terms of people that meditate. Yeah, but I think that's the cheap form without Sabrov's engaging some networks that you think are pleasurable. Do any serious meditators use drugs?
Okay, so are there any drugs which specifically affect the posterior cingulate cortex?
I don't know.
So this is what I was thinking, because there are some like traditional religions or primal religions where they would take drugs to reach higher states, like shamanism and things like this.
Okay, so just a note on drugs. They can be deceptive, because if you take certain drugs like LSD or ecstasy, you may have hyper-vivid hallucinations. So what's a hyper-vivid hallucination? It's more real than real life. And that doesn't really make sense unless you think about it as the occipital cortex. And when you're looking at something, the resolution of your eye is only maximum 12 megapixels or so around the center that you're looking at. And everything around it graded becomes less and less. So you only have maximum vision around here, higher than full definition here. And that's the area of the occipital cortex that's active. But if you have activated the whole occipital cortex, your entire field of view is activated. So I think it's more deceptive. And
so to pick up on what you were saying, and this is the way, in my personal understanding, that I see it, that Islam teaches the way to make these experiences permanent and longer lasting, rather than just you take a pill and you experience it for a few moments and it's fleeting, it goes away again. So it's not real, as you were saying. It's just fleeting.
So these have lasting effects. If you truly engage these networks in the meditative or SALAAT way, you will see. People often describe he has a nur about him, or his character, or his personality, because the TAQWA becomes inbuilt. It becomes part of your personality because of the different areas. Whereas if you're doing drugs, then all you want is the drugs. And I think there will be a clear difference in terms of the behavior that tells you that one is cheating and one isn't.
Thank you so much. There was quite a lot of stuff that I picked up in your talk. I just have a question about these Hare Krishna people. They work on your senses of taste, which is they give you a lot of sweets, and then they have the incense, so they're attacking your senses and drawing you near from there. Is it true that maybe this meditation that you're talking about doesn't actually have any substance? All it is to do with the senses and what they pick up. Is that possible?
So I think the way I've used meditation is the true cognitive introspection. But meditation has a very vague definition, and everyone uses it loosely. So I'm not sure about the particular case you mentioned. I don't have any particular knowledge on that.
I thought it might be stages where it's not using your brain. All it's doing is it's kind of hypnotizing you.
So if it's just superficial, if it's just
taking you over.
If it's just extra stimulation, then it's superficial. But smells are used in mosques. They're used as incense in Sunday masses.
Incense as in the gurdwaras and the temples as well. Yes. Thank you. Appreciate it.
Thank you so much for your talk. I'm a third-year medical student, so that was really good revision, so 2 in 1. Well, I had a question about what you mentioned about people with schizophrenia and ADHD and syndromes such as that. Would you say that because they have a dysfunction in a part of their brain that there is an inability of them to be able to pray or meditate, or, which I would disagree with, but if we're talking about in terms of the physical functions of the brain and which bits are activated when someone is introspective or meditative or praying, and then you said later on that the brain can be strengthened and changed and modeled if, for example, it has an injury. Yep. So in that context, is it such that everyone has the ability, in which case they just need to train themselves even if they have certain dysfunctions? Or
yeah, so I think there's 2 ways to look at that. The first one is to agree with you that yeah, I don't think it would. I mean, there's no knowledge, so we're just speculating here. So I don't see why they cannot use prayer, in fact, as a way, as a remedy to practice this switching. So if practice this switching as SALAAT. On a side note, recently, so there are something called gamma waves, gamma rhythm, associated with the meditative state, which you see 40 hertz on an EEG, and they've induced this in rodent models, in rats, and they stimulate artificially 40 hertz EEG, and this starts to reverse the effects of Alzheimer's in rodent mice. So there's no reason to suspect that it can't work scientifically. But then there's the other argument to make is that if someone is truly brain damaged, can they perform SALAAT to the same level as they used to? Probably not.
Thank you for this, Ali. It's interesting angles there. I have a little bit of a problem with the sleep-wake cycle.
Yeah.
In terms of, clearly, as you know, in different latitudes, the night is either very big or very small. So if you say, for example, that you need 6 hours or 8 hours of sleep before you are in a state to wake up before dawn and pray, if you only have 3 hours, then how does that work? Is that, I mean, apart from the Quranic injunction, is there any evidence from the neurology in different latitudes that people behave differently at all?
I don't know is the real answer. So I think the light aspect helps regulate the sleep, and it's the sleep itself that affects your brain network and the EEG and the modes that are involved. So even if you are in constant light or constant darkness, maybe it's harder, but people still sleep. We know people sleep. So I don't know whether the darkness per se is required, or whether it's just the state coming out of the state of the sleep and then praying.
So you can simulate night reasonably easily by having heavy curtains and so on.
Yeah.
But simulating day is a little bit more problematic, yeah? You have artificial light, but it's quite different. So I don't know. But if you come across any study on that, that might be interesting.
So to look at their effects on their sleep.
Yeah.
So I mean, even our natural circadian rhythm is not 24 hours. So even if you live in a very average normal area, after every couple of weeks or months, you will have a sleepless night, and that's when you're resetting your circadian rhythm. So yeah, I don't think it's. I'm not sure.
Sorry, you can see sometimes when you travel across time zones, and say if you have an 8-hour time difference to where you are going, you find it quite difficult to adjust in a short space of time. It does unbalance you altogether.
Yeah. So there's lots of studies on jet lag, and there are ways to treat it as well.
Any final question? Okay, I think we'll end there. Muhammad wa ala Muhammad salawat. We'd like to thank Dr. Ali Marvasti again for taking up this talk at such short notice and passing on such excellent information to. Just to let you know.